Hello everyone, and welcome to ETSI's webinar, coffee break webinar today. My name is Antti Tolvanen. I work in sales at ETSI Software and Embedded Solutions. I will give you a very concise overview of all the embedded cybersecurity related news that I've stumbled up on over the past half year. We will have quite a lot of ground to cover, so starting up with EU, taking a look at USA, and then wrapping up with some predictions. And I will start from a bit from I would say consumer perspective here, the presentation, then go into Cybersecurity Act, the new latest regulations and proposals, and then look what USA is doing at the same time in the same domain. To understand what's going on in EU related to changes in cybersecurity legislation, one good source to understand totally on top level is to Google for EU new consumer agenda. And EU is now revising quite a lot of EU legislation to take into consideration the risks related to digitalization and new kinds of platforms and technologies. They have identified that there's a lot of safety, privacy, fundamental rights challenges related to new technology, the things that devices are nowadays updated, the internet changes, there's artificial intelligence, IoT with connectivity, autonomous robotics, and EU legislation does not today take these into consideration appropriately. And on this slide, you can see from the new consumer agenda a list of different legislations that EU is currently preparing. There's legislation preparation for protecting consumers while they are offline, how they are tracked. Then EU will regulate the big major digital platforms like cloud services and social media providers and search engines. Then perhaps the most tricky one to regulate right now is artificial intelligence, and to protect the consumer interest and especially fundamental rights of people. And I will later on show some highlights from the Artificial Intelligence Act from an embedded perspective. From this new consumer agenda, I will also be discussing Delegated acts under Radio Equipment Directive and later on the Machinery Directive. I would like to bring up to emphasize kind of what kind of issues European Union sees in these new digital technologies by looking a bit on General Product Safety Directive. I was hoping that it would have been published today, the update, as this is a 20 years old directive. I will discuss it on the next page, and then related perhaps to consumer goods maybe most. But it's good also to understand what's happening on the Product Liability Directive perspective, because this digitalization is a really heavy challenge to EU and national legislation related to liability. And the big risk is that legal manufacturer liability is increasing. Okay, let's look at General Product Safety Directive. So this is a directive that is in place when there is not sector-specific legislation in place. Let's say radio equipment, machinery directive, medical device regulations, lifts, and other specific categories. So then, if there is no other safety regulation directive in place, then it's general product safety. And there's a wide category of different consumer products that I've noticed that are in the end only covered by this General Product Safety Directive, and not this that much harmonized standards or the new legislative framework. So this proposal was expected by end of this month, and they intend now to add a lot of these safety risks that are related to connectivity, artificial intelligence, robotics, and global marketplaces. And it's good to understand also that the software products are also coming into scope here, that not just physical products but also software products. And looking at these reports that have been published about product safety directive and the discussions and the research that has been done for updating this, there are certain aspects that will be added. So misuse of products, resilience against cyber attacks, safety risks when there's a lot of loss of connectivity, and then if artificial intelligence is involved, will it create safety risks when the data or to the artificial intelligence changes or the behavior of the AI changes itself? Then with products in general, one thing that needs to be considered, can the intended use of the product also change over the whole life cycle when there's new software features added to that product. And for the first time, I saw this topic of mental harm. I think this is somehow related also to fundamental rights and privacy, but especially related to artificial intelligence. They saw that one potential risk from artificial intelligence applications is mental harm caused to the users. And let's see if this will somehow also be that, to consider that when you think about safety, it's not just anymore physical harm to people and environment and property, but they're bringing the concept of mental harm and fundamental rights. And maybe one thing that might be coming up in the General Product Safety Directive is that in order to reduce the risk to legal manufacturers of complying with the difficulties and risks related to having connected devices and devices that rely on digitalization technologies, perhaps safety security responsibility needs to be shared with the whole supply chain, and whoever to the device or the software platform brings in additional software. And this brings us to look at the Product Liability Directive. So the main point here is that in EU, if there happens a safety incident and you can't identify on national level that has there been a kind of human interference or human action that points out whose fault this is, it goes on EU level directly to the legal manufacturer of the product. And this adding in connectivity, artificial intelligence, robotics, autonomous behavior, and such, and the amount of software in the device, it increases the risk for the legal manufacturer. And they see in EU that now this increased legal burden on the legal manufacturers or OEMs might hinder the adoption of new technologies. And in order to address this, they are thinking about could there be possibilities to share product liability with the supply chain, including software and hardware suppliers. And this in turn requires explicit cybersecurity and safety compliance requirements in order to have reversed burden of proof. So perhaps later on in the presentation, this will kind of become more relevant, that why kind of the importance of good security requirements that are easy to verify. And also they think about, should there be for high risk artificial intelligence applications mandatory liability insurance. So these couple of slides is an introduction to kind of thinking on EU level about these new technologies. Well, the second big thing happened kind of last December when EU came out with the Network and Information Security Directive called NIST, the revision proposal called NIST2. And compared with the directive from 2016, the definition of operators of essential services has been significantly increased. There are now essential entities and important entities. Essential entities would be, I would say, monitored by competent authorities in each member state proactively, ex ante, make sure that they meet security requirements, and then important entities would be regulated exposed after cybersecurity events. They would need to show proof that they have complied with the regulations. Now, the biggest thing here is that all manufacturers of electronics, optics, and electrical equipment is planned to be under important entities, and I bet that everybody that is sitting in this webinar today is either working for one of these companies or a supplier, or maybe purchasing also from these. So this is the first important thing to keep in mind. And what this NIST2 proposal says, that these essential and important entities should appropriate technical and organizational measures in network and information systems acquisition, development, and maintenance. And in my interpretation, this also includes software and embedded devices. Embedded devices are often part of bigger end-to-end systems and have IT infrastructure. Then they are mentioning that there could be delegated acts for requiring certification of certain ICT processes to EU cybersecurity certification schemes. I have the gut feeling that they would, the first companies that would need to take these certification schemes into use or somehow apply those in purchasing would be these essential and important entities. And they also encourage the use of European international standards. Small companies are mostly exempted, but not if they are sort of certain categories of essential entities. But it looks like from EU's from NIS directive perspective driving, let's say, security regulation of how information systems are developed and purchased. So that's good to know, and also that probably you are going to in the future be representing an important entity at least, or serving them. Of course, this will be implemented on a national basis, so the list of organizations will change. But one example from Finland, this is how Finland will probably proceed. So Finland, due to the Vastaamo cybersecurity incident where 40,000 psychotherapy patients, very private information was leaked, Finland has now decided to proceed in regulating cybersecurity of critical infrastructure. So highlights from a couple of decisions in principle. There will be harmonization of cybersecurity requirements of critical infrastructure and their cross-border supply chain. So Finnish critical infrastructure put in purchasing requirements, probably technical and process-related requirements. And then here is maybe the fact that Finland will also follow ongoing work for defining critical service and infrastructures. That's the NIS2. And Finland intends to make it mandatory for certain critical infrastructure operators to have ISO 27001 certification. And also our Minister of Transport and Communication, who's leading the national authority related to cybersecurity, is that he stated that cybersecurity has to be mandatory in Finland. There should be legislative requirements for critical infrastructure related to cybersecurity, and this is a prerequisite for digitalization. So this is kind of one direction where EU is driving in now cybersecurity regulation. Let's then go to Cybersecurity Act certification schemes. I think that most of you have heard about this, and just as a recap, that the EU Cybersecurity Act has two purposes: ENISA, to drive internal market and develop certification schemes, and act as a European coordinator in how to say, vulnerability disclosure and managing cybersecurity risks and incidents. But they also have the objective of develop certification schemes, and there are in EU Cybersecurity Act 3 assurance levels: basic, substantial, and high. And the basic one is verification of that you have implemented security requirements properly, you have documented those, and perhaps make a self-C marking or use a conformity assessment body. Substantial, you need to verify that the security features are implemented properly and do security testing, and make sure that this solution has certain kind of resistance to attackers. And on the high level, there's of course resistance to state-of-the-art cybersecurity attacks and significant penetration testing resistance. And this will be then given the certificate from a National Cybersecurity Certification Authority. This is good to keep in mind, that there's going to be conformity assessments in mind. And here's a little bit of overview of the certification schemes that have been seen. So there are 3 currently out there confirmed. So common criteria, kind of looking at information technology like smart cards and firewalls. That's kind of the first one that will probably be adopted by EU. The next one is the cloud services scheme based on IEC 27000 series, and then recently the 5G was requested. Then the next ones that are to be expected is perhaps industrial automation control system component certification scheme and consumer IoT. And on the kind of side of this, there's of course industry standards. In automotive, secure development and technical requirements are globally harmonized, and I will show that in an example in the end of the presentation. In medical devices, also 62443 is used in many areas as a basis. Railroad security is being regulated, elevators, and many other industries are kind of forming industry standards. Then from kind of these are kind of verticals or product categories, but then there's also in EU going on related to the new legislative framework, the Delegated Acts of Radio Equipment Directive related to security, and also about software updates for reconfigurable radio devices. Now I will have a separate slide here, but the current situation is that some new standards are needed to create a common technical security baseline. And also in the NISA conference in February, there was highlighted for the first time the need to make a horizontal cybersecurity regulation in Europe for all connected products. So this will be the wirelessly connected, and then later on a horizontal one. And I also have slight updates here from the ETSI Cybersecurity Week that took place last week. Okay, then there's a group in under NISA that's called the that is Cybersecurity Stakeholder Group, and they have this union rolling work program for cybersecurity certification schemes. They have listed a lot of schemes that they could develop, and here's a little bit of roadmap. So these have been requested and are coming out soon. And the next one is consumer IoT and industrial control systems. And then they are also reflecting around artificial intelligence and security development lifecycle and such. And maybe if you want to know more, you can check out the presentation at Vimeo. I have here the link. You can also find this presentation, these videos from ETSI Cybersecurity Week by just going into Vimeo and putting in the search ETSI. So then you will find those. Okay, that was about the status of the certification schemes. Work is proceeding. Then let's look at the radio equipment directive. So for those who don't know, just a recap that the new legislative framework is a set of regulations that are harmonized on EU level. So, and this is kind of purpose is to align industrial product legislation on EU level. So when you approve you gain a kind of market approval in one country, you have then market approval in all countries in EU, and radio equipment directive is part of this. And what's going on in radio equipment directive? So it still looks possible that all wirelessly connected devices will have a mandatory common technical security baseline in EU via radio equipment directive. Now, the main issue right now is to develop that there's not available a list of easily and objectively verifiable technical security requirements that could be used in connection with radio device compliance assessment to make it as automatic and as objective and as quick as possible. So the standardization teams had checked the consumer IoT and industrial control system components standards, but they were not considered suitable from the perspective of all the different product groups that would undergo RED and also these and also the objectively verifiable requirements. So now they're working on analyzing this draft standardization request and working on probably a new set of requirements. They had expected to publish this draft standard for RED security delegated acts, but now they think about this next year that it might come out. And there's a lot of information at NISA's February event, and also now the ETSI Cybersecurity Week. Good updates about this. And now what you should understand from this, that whatever comes out in RED will act as a technical security baseline for also then all connected devices. And on top of that, there will be developed then a horizontal security regulation. And now the German standardization organization seems to be very keen on driving this kind of horizontal cybersecurity regulation approach. And they have identified that in order to place a product on the market and make sure that it meets cybersecurity requirements, you could either use a cybersecurity certification scheme under Cybersecurity Act, or then a harmonized European standard for cybersecurity. And the idea is to use whatever comes out in RED as a baseline, and then have to fill that in with kind of additional kind of process requirements and additional technical requirements. So they told in these events, they have told that they have just started developing this horizontal standard. Draft come out in end of this year, and they are kind of have typo, but they're looking at all what is the total list of standards that will be needed, because there's so many different product groups, so there must be a big number of different standards that are needed. Then let's look at the artificial intelligence and machinery regulations that came currently out in April. and perhaps the Artificial Intelligence Act. So they have a concept called high-risk artificial intelligence, and what you guys should understand that if you use artificial intelligence in that if they are themselves safety critical products or safety components in products, or they are used in kind of or in also other products like medical devices, then sort of keep in mind that this is high-risk artificial intelligence. Then they have a separate list in Annex 3, where most of these are kind of use cases that involve fundamental rights risks, like monitoring big crowds, and how are you permitted to use artificial intelligence to recognize people. They are also listing a lot of artificial intelligence that is prohibited. And then, of course, artificial intelligence safety components in management and operation of certain critical infrastructures. But if the artificial intelligence you develop or plan to integrate, it's safety critical, then probably it needs to comply with this upcoming Artificial Intelligence Act proposal and whatever is applicable under the new legislative framework. So with both. And then they're also discussing a cybersecurity certification scheme, and this might be also a kind of interesting idea because the security testing of artificial intelligence requires very specific methods. And if you want to learn more about those, I would recommend looking at this video that was presented in the ETSI event. Conclusions about looking at this Artificial Intelligence Act proposal is that there's a lot of additions to the quality management systems that are required if you have high-risk AI. Probably also medical device manufacturers need to do something about the quality management systems. And then, as said, specific security testing techniques. Then, sort of the big bomb for machinery suppliers and equipment developers. So, Machine Directive is now turning into a machinery regulation, and the proposal came out, and some security-related changes compared to the kind of the applicable version that is on the market is that now the list of high-risk machinery products include all software that is ensuring safety functions, including artificial intelligence, and then also machinery that embeds any artificial intelligence systems that ensure safety functions. And then I took kind of security was mentioned in Annex 3, the essential requirements. And another interesting thing is that machinery products, even if you use third-party industrial automation systems that are probably developed according to ISO 62443 4 series and certified, and you maybe add a gateway to the product. So you need to make sure that adding connectivity to a machinery does not bring in hazardous situations, and then the machinery needs to be resilient against intentional attempts to make the safety features fail. So looking at the 1-to-1. So there's now a certain list of security requirements in machinery regulation that then needs to be, when this goes through to that machinery suppliers need to comply with, and probably also the supply chain, and I'm sort of waiting for more information about which will be the harmonized standards to use for security and machine regulation. So we could earlier see from the ETSI presentations this last week that they are planning a certification scheme for industrial automation and control systems. Last year there was published let's say IX component certification scheme draft that somebody team had developed. But looking at this machinery regulation, probably the scheme needs to also kind of cover the product or the whole system. If you have a bigger machinery system in place, that the certification scheme perhaps should also cover that. It's of course a good idea to have a certification scheme on the component level, because that defines the maximum level of security that the system can reach. But then, of course, when integrated, the threat model, architecture, and use cases become much more different, and there's a lot of vulnerabilities and security issues that could be added by the integrators and product developers, the product suppliers. Okay, well, and then going back again to what in the electricity distribution sector, what the standards that they recommended for the certification scheme. So there's the 62443 was considered at least in operational technology and electricity distribution as some of the most potential ones. So eagerly waiting to hear something that what will be the harmonious standards for the machinery regulation proposal. Going forward, looking at what's happening in USA. So in December, they came out the IoT Cybersecurity Improvement Act of 2020. So starting early 23, there will be strict purchasing requirements for all IoT devices in the federal government. This doesn't affect general IT devices like mobile phones. And if you see that your market includes IoT devices for the federal government, you might want to check out this NISTIR 8259D standard that's on these pages and check out the technical requirements that are listed here. There's quite a lot here listed that typically device developers do not have as core competence. This requires quite a lot of IT security infrastructure, and in this area, for example, at Etteplan we have partnered with Telio Device Management who supplies this security IT infrastructure, device management and provisioning and key management and such. And when you look through this, it could be a good idea to check that what's kind of core competence of these requirements in your own company and your supply chain, and think about what additional capabilities you need in your supply chain in order to be able to develop and supply to customers of the whole life cycle secure embedded devices. So this is a good standard to familiarize. I think it's quite a thorough list of requirements, and they say that this is a low security technical baseline, but looking at what they have here, this is, I'd say, it's not a low level. There's very detailed requirements. So then the other thing that came out recently was in May 12th, the executive order improving the nation's cybersecurity. So I remember in the beginning I mentioned about the NIS2. Now US is also moving forward. So you remember maybe these major cyber attacks that in US that have affected hospitals and fuel distribution. And Biden has decided that incremental improvements will not give USA the security they need. Now, federal government needs to make bold changes and significant investments in order to defend vital institutions in American way of life, and it includes both IT and OT. So there's many sections in this executive order. What could be of interest is that federal government cybersecurity shall be modernized. So they heavily encourage the use of cloud-based architectures and zero trust architectures also. So cloud migrations are to be expected. And then maybe from our perspective, more interesting can also be this enhancing software supply chain security. So they have a term called critical software, and critical software will be regulated in purchasing within 1 year. So these are in software solutions, the kind of software that perform functions that are critical to trust, and probably in August we'll get the list published. And also secure development process and technical product requirements will become mandatory for this critical software. In addition to, how to say, the critical infrastructure and federal government, they also are going to plan how to regulate all consumer software and consumer IoT. So if these are your IoT or software to USA is your market, so they are kind of having two things that they're investigating: how IoT cybersecurity criteria for consumer labeling program, how should the IoT devices be security tested, and what are the compliance assessment criteria, and then also secure software development practices or criteria for consumer software labeling program, so standalone software applications. So this is a major thing. US is planning to regulate practically all software development from a security perspective. And based on what's happening in the executive order, looks like US is again taking the lead here in regulating security in general. Then to wrap up, I have a couple of future predictions what will happen. So as USA, I think that the EU will also over the next few years regulate from a security perspective, at least exposed after The event has happened all devices and software that involve safety, privacy, or fundamental rights risks, or which are used by essential and important entities. And remember that these include all device manufacturers. Basically, I personally see that this affects, for example, Etteplan's whole customer base. So this is a very interesting development. And in EU, the main speed bump is right now is getting these red delegated acts and getting this objectively verifiable security requirement standard developed, so that it can speed up the compliance assessment procedures. When this goes forward, then everything else I think will take a quick jump forward in embedded security. As mentioned earlier, I think USA is now moving a bit faster. And then also, for your information, security in automotive industry from OEM down to Tier 3, that software and hardware developers, is now globally regulated. And when these NISTIRs and executive orders, cybersecurity schemes go forward, I expect this to happen, for example, generally in industrial equipment driven by also machinery regulations. And what to keep in mind is right now, I think that equipment manufacturers should think about when they have started connected devices or embedded devices, that what is core competence related device and application security, what should be in-house, and then think about when there's a lot of security technical requirements in embedded devices that require actually a lot of IT infrastructure, that is that also kind of core competence. And it's very important to have the right supply chain also for security, because secure development of software and testing, those are kind of niche, very niche areas. So this will perhaps affect also a bit the supply chain strategy. Good example there from automotive. So there was a security standard was harmonized globally, and this means that the OEMs, when they place cars on the market starting in summer 2024, these cars need to comply both with kind of product with safety, but also with a number of different product security requirements. And now these requirements are rolling down the whole automotive supply chain. And I guess that for these players, if they want to be in the business, they need to implement these into their quality management systems, or figure out how to then work under the information security management systems of the automotive manufacturers. And this is one industry where compliance is mandatory if you want to be in business. Okay, then to wrap up, before we go to any potential questions that you might have, just to mention that at Etteplan we're working on we're looking at how to structure a cybersecurity service and capabilities according to IEC 6244341 secure development product life cycle, and we're also aiming to have a secure development process in place in the near future. So we have secure development services available, and we'd like to promote also. We have a really good penetration testing team if you need that. But then actually, would you have any questions right now? Let's see if there's anything in the chat coming up. Any questions? I will stay here for a couple of minutes in the webinar to see if there's any questions that come up, or then you can also, I have my phone number and email here in the beginning of the presentation. So please don't hesitate to call me or send me email if you want to discuss more, or you have a certain question and want to have a copy of the presentation for our own uses. So thank you very much for your attention. I wish you everybody a really nice summer.